Dinosaurs, the biblical view. I always like to tell people I'm not giving you a scientific view. We don't have one. We find dinosaurs, that's scientific. We dig them up, that's scientific. We find them in different strata, okay? They're not restricted to the Mesozoic. That's what the evolutionary crowd. We find them up in the Cenozoic, all the way up to the Miocene layers. They don't know how to explain that. I mean, so we find dinosaur bones up 20, they're dating 20 million years ago. That is destroying what they think, what they've advanced. So I'm going to give you a biblical view because we don't know how to explain how they got here and when they were here and that kind of information except by a belief overview from the Scripture, which I think is solid, but it's not scientific in the sense of a provable assumption. I have a neat little book back there that I've written myself. If you don't have a copy of this, Rocks, Fossils, and Dinosaurs, I read out of it this morning. It's got over 500 quotes in it from the evolutionary crowd that'll really give you ammunition to use when you're witnessing about this information. So that's back there. You can go back and make a bargain with Bob, and he will help you. Okay, foundational to the creation-evolution debate, and of course the dinosaur story is right in the middle of this. And these three things we want to emphasize: whether or not the biblical God is generally sovereign. If God is sovereign, then of course this is a slam dunk. All right. 2, whether or not Jesus Christ is the only reconciliation for man's sin. And I think that's a slam dunk. I don't think there's any problem with that. Whether or not God's Word, the Bible, is absolute truth. So if you can embrace all of that with all of your heart, then you don't have any trouble with what I'm going to say to you about dinosaurs. But be aware what I'm going to tell you is not a scientific opinion. It's a biblical worldview opinion. Evolution predicts in this scheme of things that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old. Dinosaurs lived during the Mesozoic between 225 and 65 million years ago. Dinosaurs became extinct at least 64 million years before man. So if dinosaurs, this is the big problem from a biblical perspective, if dinosaurs became extinct 64 million years before man even came on the scene, then you have dinosaurs chewing things up and spilling blood all over the place, and the whole notion or the basis for the gospel has been destroyed. Because if there's blood before Adam sinned, if there's pain and suffering before Adam sinned, then we got a problem. There has never been a global flood. That's their position. Radiometric dating is an accurate measurement of the age of the earth. And of course there's problems there. I think one of the most significant things I've discovered about this radiometric process is the RATE project that was done by 7 researchers and 7 physicists and 1 theologian. I think it's neat to have a theologian. They did a 7-year well-funded research project from 1998 to 2005. I went to the Institute of Creation Research and we heard them give their report of their 7-year research project at David Jeremiah's church. And believe me, the church was full to the walls of people who came in to hear this report. The thing that was so encouraging to me is that John Bumgardner, who is a geophysicist, probably the finest in the world, he's a Bible believer, young earth creationist, and he is a brilliant guy. He said, the reality is, ladies and gentlemen, that the animals and the plants in the so-called geologic column all lived together and died together. Oh, that's mind-boggling. He said that we found detectable, measurable carbon-14 in the fossils of all the layers. So evolution is history. That destroys it. If you have measurable, detectable carbon-14 and all the geologic layers, Cambrian on up, then the Cambrian's not 550 million years old. In fact, measurable, detectable carbon-14 values. Kind of interesting. He discovered that to do this, they gathered coal. Let's see, they gathered some Miocene and some Pennsylvanian and some Cretaceous, I believe, coal. And he prepared it all and sent it off to the most significant carbon-14 laboratory in the United States. And he found statistically similar values of carbon-14 in all layers. Well, if you got the same amount of carbon-14 in Pennsylvanian coal as you do in Cretaceous coal, as you do in Miocene coal, then you're gathering coal from all the eras, okay, the Cenozoic, the Mesozoic, and the Paleozoic. And you've not studied geology much, be aware of the fact that the evolutionary gang has given that hundreds of millions of years. But if you've got statistically similar values of carbon-14 in all those layers, then they're whistling Dixie or something else. Radiometric dating is not an accurate age for the Earth. It's got problems because if you've got statistically measurable assays of carbon-14 from the top to the bottom of the so-called geologic column, then the whole notion of radiometric dating and the accuracy of that for the age of the Earth has a problem. I suggest to you, ladies and gentlemen, from a biblical point of view, that if there is any kind of a geologic column, it was laid down during the 371-day flood. So no wonder that Dr. John Baumgartner has just went ahead and latchkeyed this. I mean, he wrote it on the bottle, stamped it on the cork. He tied a bow around it, that all these layers have animals and plants in it, live together and die together by the same event. So that's a neat deal. The fossil record was laid down by uniformitarian processes taking hundreds of millions of years, and so those predictions are significant. The biblical creation predictions, and we can only make predictions. They make predictions because this just flows out of their worldview. We make predictions that flows out of our worldview on the same issue. The Bible is the absolute word of the Creator God. If it's the absolute word of the Creator God and it tells about these issues, then you can trust it. Amen. The earth and everything in it was created about 6,000 years ago. That's a biblical worldview. It's a circumstantial prediction based upon the model of young earth creation. Reptiles, now called dinosaurs, were created on the 6th day of the creation week and lived with man. Well, that really frustrates the evolutionist. But that's what we're totally convinced. About 4,458 years ago, there was a global flood that laid down the present fossil record. So the entire geologic column is a record of the flood of Noah. And it only lasted 371 days. So there can't be much difference between the Cretaceous and the Ordovician or whatever else. The many variables in radiometric dating render it incapable of giving accurate dates of the unobserved past. So when we are dealing with the unobserved past, all we can do is apply our belief system or our worldview to the predictions we would make about it, but there's nothing you can do in a scientific context about the unobserved past. So we must ask, what is science? Well, science is observable. You know, I used to teach this every year until '94. I would teach the kids that modern science says that we create a problem about some observable reality that we want to understand a little bit more about it. And so we create a problem, and about that problem we write a hypothesis. We may or may not be able to prove the hypothesis, but the hypothesis predicts a research project. We do the research project, we either prove or disprove our hypothesis, and then we retest. So when I was instructing and leading science fairs in high schools, and that's a comedy of errors, to think that 9th and 10th grade students are going to be interested in an ongoing 3 to 6 month project, I found out that most science fair projects are done the night before they're due. And you can't get a high school kid, at least a junior high kid, to understand that the science fair project, where you want to show the science method, we want to understand their problem, we want to understand their hypothesis, we want to understand how they researched it, we want to understand how they re-examined it and re-hypothesized and then did additional research. The more research they did and the more they reconstructed their hypothesis, the higher they rank in the science fair competition. But 95% of all high school science fairs are just book reports that the parents did the night before. It would be neat if they would do it, but they don't do it. It takes discipline to pursue this. But can science examine the unobserved past? No, it can't examine the unobserved past. So that's a matter of faith or belief system. Is there a significant difference between operational science and historical science? Yes. In operational science, you can actually test and retest and retest and falsify and retest and retest and falsify until you continue to retest and rehypothesize until you begin to prove something. And at a certain point, when you've gathered enough material, you can establish a scientific theory. So when someone says that evolution is a scientific theory, I come unglued at the seams. I never will forget going to Alabama and meeting Phyllis Schlafly, leader for the state of Alabama. And they just got through a Supreme Court level contest where they were at the Supreme Court trying to get the word fact taken out of the textbooks with regard to evolution. The textbook said evolution is a fact. They said, no, it's not a fact. So they fussed about that. Well, she was all excited because she said, we've won this incredible, monumental judicial test. The judge decided that we're going to remove the word fact out of the textbooks. And I said, well, what did they replace it with? Theory. I said, ma'am, I don't want to rain on your parade, but you didn't do a thing. Because in a scientific setting, a theory by definition has been at least proved one time by research. You can't test evolution scientifically, therefore it cannot be, in a scientific context, a scientific theory. So please understand, the man on the street, he may be an engineer or a medical doctor. I don't know what he may be most anything. It doesn't mean that he's ignorant. It just means he's uninformed about these kinds of ideas. If something is a scientific theory within the context of science, if it's a theory, it means it has at least been tested once. And there's no way under the sun we know how to test evolution or creation. We don't know how to test it. You believe it or you don't believe it. We don't have to test Genesis 1. How are you going to do that? In the beginning, God created heaven. How are you going to do that? You believe that or don't believe it? You can't believe that whatever million or billion years ago there was a big bang, a particle, you know, this, and matter tended to collapse upon itself till it became infinite in gravity. So this one little electron or proton, whatever it was, it had in it all the matter of the universe. How are you going to test that? So you can't test the basic theories that drive this debate. You believe it or you don't believe it. So operational science is something we do to make medicine better, something we do to make surgical procedures better, something we do to make the corn grow, something we do to deal with raising cattle, something we do to make cars run better. That's operational science, because you can experiment and you can adjust and you can experiment and you can adjust and you can experiment and you can adjust. But historical science is dealing with the unobserved past. You can't deal with the unobserved past. So when I say to you we're going to talk about the flood of Noah, or we're going to talk about dinosaurs, all I can do is cite to you what I think is legitimate. You understand that? Are you good with that? Okay. Here's an atheist. Richard Bozarth. All the way back in 1978, he said Christianity has fought, still fights, and will fight science. Now, that's not true. Christianity doesn't fight science because the scientific method, modern scientific processes and procedures, was provided for, mandated in Genesis 1:28. The subdue and the dominion mandate is the basis for modern science. So when you subdue, that means that you master something. And so that's the pure sciences. And when you master an idea, God said, Adam, I've given you this big brain, I've given you all this wonderful creation. Now I want you to go out and govern it and take care of it and look after it. And so you subdue it. That means you study it. You understand how it ticks. And when you understand how it ticks, then you have dominion over it. You regulate it. You govern it. So the pure and applied sciences are mandated in Genesis 1:28. You got that? How many's got that? So this guy's saying Christianity has fought, still fights, and will fight science. No, what he means, he's got his tongue in his cheek, he's rolling his morsel around on his tongue. He's not talking about the scientific method, he's talking about evolution. He's trying to marry the idea. And he says it later, to a desperate end over evolution, because evolution destroys utterly and finally the very reason Jesus' earthly life is supposedly made necessary. Destroy Adam and Eve and the original sin, that's what they're after. They can't take it. Destroy Adam and Eve in the original sin, and in the rubble you'll find the sorrow remains of the Son of God. That's what they're after. They're after the cross. They're after the blood of Christ. They're after Calvary. They don't like it. Take away the meaning of his death. If Jesus was not the Redeemer who died for our sins, and this is what evolution means, then Christianity is nothing. So this whole debate is about the blood of Christ. That's what it's about. Boils down to that. Therefore, the two primary goals of evolutionism is Mosaic chronology. They can't allow the Mosaic chronology to be right. So they'll fuss about the 6,000-year age of the earth. They'll fuss about the creation in 6 24-hour days. They'll fuss about that because they said that's nonsense. Then they'll fuss about Noah's flood, the accuracy of biblical history. These are the two ideas that I've discovered after 30 years of actively pursuing all of this data, that I boiled it all down. These are the two big problems. Is the age of the earth right in the Bible? Was there really a flood called the flood of Noah? If those two things are right, then evolution is out in the tule patch, okay? Why are these issues so important to evolutionists? One, evolution needs vast ages for the earth in order for their view of origins to be legitimized. They need millions and billions of years. I mean, Carl Sagan, he was very breathy and bombastic. He'd say, billions and billions and billions. What's billions and billions? We got billions. What's a billion years? Who in the world can define a billion years? What's a billion years? I have no idea what a billion years is. Amen. In fact, we now know that the earth is, that the moon is moving away from the earth. It's gradually moving away. That's bad. We're running out of soup, okay? We now understand that the mutational load in the human species is exponentially growing at such a rate that we probably can't last another 100 years. In other words, geneticists are telling us that maybe 100 years from today we may be extinct. Well, there's a problem. And so if you had a billion years, say a million years, in 1 million years, the Mississippi Delta at its present rate of growth, and we've been measuring the growth of the Mississippi Delta for 140 years at its present rate, assuming that that's uniformitarian. Okay, it's uniform, been doing about the same, flood year and quiet year, so the average growth of the delta is about the same year to year. So we've been measuring 140 years, so in a million years, we would have already filled the entire Gulf of Mexico. You could walk from New Orleans all the way to South America on dry land. There wouldn't be no Gulf. Take less than a million years. Can't be a million. The earth can't be a million years old. All the mountains on the earth would be eroded smooth. There would be no mountains. There's a tendency toward equilibrium. There's a tendency toward everything to move to its lowest common denominator. So soil tends to move to fill lakes and to fill low spots, so that there's a tendency toward equalization. Amen. And so that's the common drive in nature. Therefore, they must attempt the refutation of the Mosaic chronology to prove that the Genesis record is a myth. They can't stand the earth to be made by a God that can do this whole deal, all the universe. They can't stand a God that will say, I can create this whole thing with my word in 6 days. But we have a God that did that and didn't break a sweat. What a mighty God we serve. That's not a big deal for the Creator God. But they can't deal with that, so they have to make that a myth. They got to make that ridiculous. The secret agenda is the cross of Christ, and evolutionary spin about dinosaurs provides this legitimacy. And so they've got to have blood spilled before man got here, because they know if they can justify the spilling of blood and the establishment of pain and suffering before Adam sinned, then they violated the integrity and historical foundation for the cross of Jesus Christ. And that's what this is about. This is completely a spiritual battle, and it's taken a scientific posture as a part of the subtle deceptive process. The Bible clearly teaches there was no death of day 5, creation day 5, and creation day 6 life before Adam sinned. If you have any death, pain, or suffering, any disease, any kind of problem with marine life, with avian life, flying creatures, or terrestrial creatures, before Adam sinned, then the whole thing collapses. The Bible's a joke. Jesus is a myth. That's all there is to it. That's how meaningful this is. But if there wasn't any death before Adam sinned, if Adam's sin was the result, brought about pain and suffering and death, then the biblical account is obviously true, and I believe it is. So how do we accurately determine the time in which dinosaurs lived? How do we know if the geologic timescale, the so-called geologic column of rock layers, really exists? Well, we worked that over this afternoon. And how do we know the real age of the rocks? A fellow said, well, that rock, that's a baby rock. This is an old grandpa rock. Well, how do you know that? Well, this is much older. How do we know? It's because of the fossils in it. But if the geologic column doesn't exist, if the geologic column was created by a flood, a global flood event in 371 days, then the rocks on the bottom are no different in age than the rocks on the top, not more than 371 days. That's about the end of it. So just a little over a year. Why is the word dinosaur not in the Bible? We're going to talk about that. So this geologic model doesn't exist anywhere in the world. That's a revealing reality. It doesn't exist like that. You can't find that stack of rocks like that. You can't even find all 6 divisions of the Ordovician. In fact, if you had all 6 divisions of the Ordovician, where's the Ordovician? Right there. If you had all those rocks, there's 6 divisions of that layer there, that system, that geologic system. If you had them all together, it'd take about 30 miles of rock. We've never seen it all together. If you had the whole column in one place, it'd be a stack of rocks about 100 miles high. It doesn't exist. There's no place to go to see that anywhere in the world, not even the Grand Canyon. So it only appears in textbooks. That makes this very suspicious to me. So now then, common propaganda about dinosaurs. National Geographic is one of their propaganda sheets. Writer Joel Achenbach in 2004, he went out and he tried to find a consensus from scientists about dinosaurs, and he found about 30 or so professional dinosaur hunters and asked them a series of questions to see if he could garner some kind of a consensus among these professionals. He couldn't find a consensus. They're like preachers. They don't hardly agree on anything. Jack Horner, which Matt talked about this afternoon, he said in this interview, he said, for 20 years we've done what we call arm waving. We've made a hypothesis based on very little evidence. Now we're sitting down and we're saying we've got all these ideas. Are they real? March 2004, they're not sure it's real. Well, what about all this nonsense on Discovery Channel? 90% of that is out there, ladies and gentlemen, in left field. Left field. Left field. 2 left feet, 2 left hands, the right eye don't work. You understand me? It's left field. The dinosaur fossil record is actually rather poor, said one scientist. Intact, articulated, museum-quality skeletons are fairly rare. Skeletons fall apart. A bone exposed to the elements may simply explode. In some bone beds, there are so many tiny skeletal fragments you'd think the creatures had been dropped from a plane. So at the end of this article, on page 33, Achenbeck says, but it was still exciting. He didn't prove his hypothesis. He couldn't find consensus. But he said, but still exciting. Now get this, kiddos. All you guys and gals are in school, listen up. Because what we don't know about dinosaurs, you get me? What we don't know about dinosaurs is far more than what we know. That means that on Nova and the Science Channel and PBS, and they're just spinning yarns, telling stories. This is still a new and evolving science. We've just scratched the surface. Wow. Scientific American said in 2004, in Spielberg's Jurassic Park, which boasted the most accurate popular depiction of dinosaurs ever, the T-Rex was as usual presented as a killing machine whose sole purpose was aggressive, bloodthirsty attacks on helpless prey. T-Rex's personal persona, or popular persona, however, is as much function of artistic license as concrete evidence, as concrete scientific evidence. A century of study and the existence of 30 fairly complete T-Rex specimens have generated substantial information about its anatomy, but inferring behavior from anatomy alone is perilous, and the true nature of the T-Rex continues to be shrouded in mystery. Whether it was even primarily a predator or a scavenger, isn't that interesting? In Scientific American, they don't know for sure if it was a predator or a scavenger. Did it chase things like Jurassic Park said, and the T-Rex is running 45 miles an hour? Do you know recently, I went to the Jurassic Park movie because USA Radio Network called me and asked me if I'd do an expose on it. I said, I don't want to do that. He said, please. I said, but I don't want to. That means I'll have to go watch the Goofy movie. I don't want to go watch that movie. They said, well, please, because there's so many professing Christians calling, and because USA Radio Network has a consortium of about 200 or 300 radio stations across America. And he said, we need something, or tell our editorial department something they can say to these people. So would you please do that? So I did. I went and watched it. And they had T-Rex chasing a Jeep at 45 miles an hour. That is physiologically impossible. A 6-ton biped with his head leaning out over his base about 6 feet, running behind that Jeep at 45 miles per hour. If he'd have stumbled, he would have fallen for 3 weeks. His head is as big as a Volkswagen Bug, so at 12 feet or 13 feet from the ground, he would hit the ground, his head would hit the ground at 6 times gravity, 6 G's, so it'd be over for him. And if he did fall and survived, his little arms would not permit him to get up. That is a divine comedy. Don't anybody tell you that God the Creator is not a significant joker. I mean, he is funny. Built this giant animal with his big teeth and his little bitty arms. What's he going to do? He can't even rub the end of his nose. So whether it was even a predator or a scavenger is still a matter of debate. And so Jurassic Park had this mosquito with this proboscis, okay, about maybe 1/4 of an inch, maybe 1/4 inch. and he's preserved in amber, and his little body was full of blood. And they took that blood out of there, and they assumed, I mean, just like a foxtrot, they just assumed that was T-Rex blood. And they said they discovered 250 nucleotides, DNA. Well, in an animal of this size right there, that's a Tyrannosaurid. It's an Albertosaurus, but it's in the same family as T-Rex is in, just much smaller. There's a T-Rex skull, so you can see the difference in their size. This guy is about 7 foot at the hips. This guy right here was 12.5 foot at the hips. So this guy was 39 feet long, probably weighed 6 tons. This guy is 22 feet long, probably weighed 1.5 tons. Okay, so that's an Albertosaurus. This is a T-Rex. And so they assumed this was T-Rex DNA. And we would say that they found 250 nucleotides to have the genome. I'm going to say they had to have 300,000 genes, minimum. But let's just make it simple. Let's say they only needed 300. They found 250. Does that make it simple? No, let's make it a little more simple than that. Let's say you needed 3,000, and they had 250. So they need about 97% of the genes. So what did the movie say they did? How many can remember? They filled the gap, 97% of the DNA gap, with what? A bullfrog, that's right. And you can't get a T-Rex out of that. If 97% of the DNA is bullfrog DNA, the best you can do is a bullfrog with big teeth. That's it, nothing more or less. So this idea here is kind of simplistic. And so I told them, I said, the problem is they found 250 nucleotides, assuming they were DNA, was the DNA from a T-Rex. And an animal of that magnitude would, I mean, you just compare the DNA in an elephant, for example. It had to have at least that many. So the T-Rex and the whole notion of the mosquito blood being T-Rex, and they could manipulate the reproduction of T-Rexes from that DNA is out of sight. Okay. Well, the first T-Rex fossil was found in 1902 by Barnum Brown, and it was named Tyrannosaurus rex, which means tyrant lizard king, by Henry Fairfield Osborn in 1905. The fossil consisted only of a few bone fragments, okay, until 1988. So, on the basis of teeth and vertebrae and some fragments of ribs and leg bones, okay, put the whole thing in a bushel basket. They named this thing Tyrant Lizard King. I mean, what big teeth you have, my dear, better to eat you with. So it looked like a monster because of the teeth. You have these 11-inch banana-like teeth. I mean, look at these teeth. Pretty good-sized teeth. But it was 83 years later before they found enough T-Rex fossil to include the front arms. And then the axe fell. Now they got this monster with the teeth, the head, and the legs, and the body. Now it's got these arms. I mean, so you're going to go out on Saturday night and beat up everybody in town, and you can't touch your nose? It's a joke. So, a divine comedy. Hey! I'm trying to pass the potatoes. Remember, my forearms are just as useless as yours. Of primary concern in this debate is the difference between the two views, creation and evolution, concerning the definition of death. We're all standing on Henry M. Morris. Dr. Henry Morris is the father of the revival of biblical creationism in North America, maybe the world. Right before he passed in 2006, he said to me, Tom, when you're out teaching, I want to encourage you to re-emphasize the difference between the notion of death from an evolutionary perspective and the notion of death from a biblical perspective. From an evolutionary perspective, in the last page of Darwin's On the Origin of Species, Darwin said the most fantastic, unbelievable things can develop as the result of death that can be imagined. So he believed that death was a mechanism for development. The Bible teaches that death is the result and the curse of sin. The vast difference between the two. Paul said, therefore, just as through one man sin entered the world, and death through sin. Death is the result of sin. There can be no death caused by dinosaurs before Adam sinned, or anything else for that matter, because death is the result of sin. For since by man came death, by man came life, and the resurrection from the dead. That's a contrast between Adam, the first Adam, and the second Adam, the Lord Jesus Christ. There are at least three compelling evidences for the existence of dinosaurs living with men. And so I'm going to give you these three. I'm about half finished here. I'm going to give you these three evidences, and then Matt's going to come talk to you about some exciting things in the universe. A compelling presentation coming up on stars and starlight and the speed of light and stuff. So hang in there. Did dinosaurs really exist? Yes, they existed. We find them all over the place. According to the USGS, the United States Geological Survey, approximately 700 species have been named. A recent scientific review suggests that only about half of these are based on fairly complete specimens. These species are placed in about 300 valid dinosaur genera, like Stegosaurus, Diplodocus, and so forth. Recent estimates suggest that about 700 to 900 more dinosaur genera may yet be discovered. And so that gives you an idea. About 700 species have been named. Okay. And we know that there have been some duplications. Okay. They found an Apatosaurus. I believe it was Othniel Marsh, the guy up from Yale. He found a Camarasaurus. He put the head of the Camarasaurus on the Apatosaur, and he called it Brontosaurus. But it was mixed up. They do this all the time. He realized it was not a Brontosaurus, only in the comic books. And so when he got the head squared around, he realized he'd made a mistake. I believe that's happened many, many times. Dinosaurs, Old Testament Hebrew words that can also mean dinosaur, is found in the word behemoth and the word tanim. So behemoth and behemoth, plural and singular, this is found first of all in Genesis 1:24, and God said, let the earth bring forth cattle. The word cattle is behemoth, meaning a large quadruped. It doesn't mean cow necessarily. It probably includes cows, but this is the whole notion of quadrupeds, and dinosaurs can be in that loop. So the King James says cattle, that causes people to think moo cows. They're there, but more than that is there. Again in Job 40:15, does anybody have an NIV in your lap? Can I borrow it?
I can read it. Yes.
Yeah, I can read it.
Tiny.
Well, I may have to take out my glasses, okay? I can probably read it. I wonder why we carry Bibles like this. You couldn't fight off a nap with this Bible. I'm kidding you. Okay, Job chapter 40, verse 15. Look at behemoth, which I made along with you. Now notice if you're looking at this Bible, you've got an NIV. Let me see. Is it a... Okay. This is a 2002.
It is? Oh.
Wow. Let me see what it says. Okay, it's still okay. I've only used the 84, but this is okay. Okay, verse 15. Look at behemoth, which I made along with you. So whatever this is, it was made along with man. And he feeds on grass like an ox, so it's an herbivore. what strength he has in his loins. And that word loin refers to the small of his back. If you'll notice on my slide there, anatomically this is the small of the back. And his force is in, let me see what it says, and his strength in his loins, and what power of the muscles of his belly. And so the navel, sharir in Hebrew, doesn't mean belly button, but the nerves, ligaments, and muscles of the abdomen is what is being referred to in this word. His tail sways like a cedar, and so he moves his tail like a araz. Refers to the cedar of Lebanon. This is certainly not referring to an elephant or hippopotamus. And in this translation, there's a footnote up there in verse 15 after behemoth, and down here, possibly the hippopotamus or the elephant. So that's what they're saying in this translation of the Bible, that it could be a hippopotamus or an elephant. Well, we're going to look at that. Does that look like a cedar? How about that? I don't think we got the right kind of tail here. I think that's what we're talking about. Both of these animals are behemoth. But only one has a tail that could be called a cedar tree. And if you go to a museum, like the one at the University of Oklahoma, they've got a patasaur there that's 92 feet long. It's about 40 feet tall. The tail extends out behind the pelvic girdle. So it's the continuation of the vertebral column. So the caudal version of the vertebral column comes out like this. It's about 30 feet long, the tail is, on this animal in the museum. And it's a skeleton. And so we don't have to do the mental experiment here, but the processes, the anterior and ventral processes on the column, on the tail, about 3 feet, okay, maybe 3.5 feet. So we're talking about the processes including the vertebrae. You've got bones about that tall or maybe a little taller, so just wrap muscle and skin around that. And you've got a tail right there at the base of the trunk of the body about 4 feet across. A pretty good tree. And it's 30 feet long. So he can sway his tail like a cedar. So I'm totally convinced that this is talking about a sauropod. So if the word dinosaur is not found in the Bible, why? Why is the word not found in the Bible? Well, let's talk about that a minute. Got 15 minutes. And I got 20 slides. And God created the great Tanim. The word Tanim, translated in King James 28 times, 21 of those times translated dragon. So in the Old Testament, the word dragon is used most of the time for the translation of the Hebrew word Tanim. Many of the passages in the Bible where this word is used, the context justifies the fact that we're talking about something that's very dinosaurian-like. And so we would suggest this is what this is talking about. Richard Owen coined the word dinosaur. Between 1841 and 1843, he was working on a megalosaurus in his laboratory. And he was working on another duckbill of sorts. And he looked at these bones and he said, in his letter to the British Association, he said, until I learn more about this, I'm going to refer to these as Dinosauria. And he used the Latin and the Greek, and Dinosaurus means terrible lizard. So he's the guy that invented the English word dinosaur, and it didn't become available until about 1841 or 42. So historically, that's rather recently. And so the primary reason the word dinosaur is not in the Bible wasn't invented until 1841. And the first English translation was the Tyndale Bible, and it was in the early 1500s. So you don't find dinosaur in the Bible. There are English translations of any significance. You might have versions of the Bible in English, but English translations of any significance were before the word dinosaur was invented. Okay, these lizards were created on day 6, so they obviously lived with man. That's the biblical point of view. All reptiles were created on days 5 and 6. So we have marine reptiles on day 5 and terrestrial reptiles on day 6. And dinosaurs differentiate from all other reptiles principally because of their hips. There's ornithischian and bird-hipped, and saurischian, the lizard hips. So lizard hips and bird hips, and we classify dinosaurs primarily because of how their hips are made. And so if they had bird hips, they were a particular kind. This is bird hipped, and this is lizard hipped. Okay? There are no other dinosaurs other than the bird hipped and lizard hipped kind. So these guys existed days 5 and 6. But the marine reptiles is a whole different ball game. So did they really live with man? That's the question we're going to ask. Mary Schweitzer, as you remember seeing Matt's evidence a while ago, she did a marvelous study on blood cells and collagen tissue and osteocytes, bone cells. And she pretty much proved that they're not as old as we thought they were. And so the following evidence indicated that they did live with man. For example, when she started doing this work, she found these blood cells and she showed them to her boss, Jack Horner, and Horner recorded in his book, Dinosaur Lives, on page 228. This was a book written in 1997. And I'm not going to read it all. Just going to read you can read it all if you want to. But under the microscope, there appeared to be red blood. There were pretty blood cells preserved within the bone tissue. Mary conducted a number of tests in an attempt to rule out the possibility that what she discovered were in fact blood cells. The test instead confirmed her initial interpretation. So all the evidence comes back, even from the pathology department, that you've got blood cells. Wow. And this is the famous slide that changed the way we think. She even found hemoglobin, she found blood cells, she found bone matrix, she found vascular walls, all that was found. And of course the blood cells, they were like rubber bands, they would stretch. Kind of interesting. And so she found all of these things. She started breaking femur bones. So she makes her living breaking femur bones. And she's found blood cells in dinosaurs in all kinds of sorts. Yes? It means they're not as old as they say they are. Because blood, of all organic matter, blood cells are the most vulnerable. That's this lady right here. Blood cells are the most vulnerable to decay.
Okay. Means they should have been decayed.
They should have been decayed. In the right kind of preservation, with the right kind of fossilization, you might can get blood cells to survive 4,000 years, not 68 million. I mean, that just, but you see, they hop over that like a foxtrot. They don't even pay any attention to what they've just done to themselves. They're whistling in the graveyard. I mean, if you go to hell, ladies and gentlemen, please don't blame it on evolution. That would make you kind of goofy. Understand? I hope you do. In Science magazine, 2005, I am quite aware that according to conventional wisdom and models of fossilization, these structures aren't supposed to be there, but there they are, and I'm kind of shocked. Okay. In the National Bridges National Monument, we found these petroglyphs. The Anasazi Indians lived back in those about 9 AD to 12 AD, and they've obviously carved these things in the walls of the caves, and they carved them in a rather spectacular manner. That's a sauropod, that's an Edmontosaurus, okay? And they were not looking at pictures of them, they were looking at the animals. That's how they figured that out. The Ankara Temple that Matt also talked about, I'm going to talk a little bit about this. Geologist Dr. Don Patton and anthropologist Dr. Dennis Swift. They went there in 2006 and they were looking for evidences that they knew were there, and so these little temple, this little module of temples, they found this roundel on the base of this column, and this was about the 12th century AD or so. In Western Europe. Ken Ham went there to a church he was aware of, and he gave a gift to the rector of this church to pull this rug up out of the aisleway, and under the rug was this bronze plate. What he wanted to see was this fringe right here, because it had apatosaurs, sauropods wrestling with their neck. And so that bronze plate has been in this church 1,000 years. I mean, there's old stuff in Western Europe. How many know that? My wife and I were in northern Italy in the city of, was it Torino? Northern Italy. May not have been Torino, some little town up there in the north. And we're sitting on the sidewalk cafe eating, what do you think we were eating in Italy? Spaghetti. What else would you eat in Italy? We're sitting there on the sidewalk eating spaghetti, and across the street was an arena that was built in 1 AD. I can't believe I'm eating spaghetti and it's all over my shirt. I can't believe I'm sitting there looking at an arena that was built in 1 AD. Wow. So they took all this as pictures that was taken by Answers in Genesis people, and they found these things on the fringe of this plate, and it's just an indication of these guys lived a whole lot more recently than we've been told. Okay, where did the dinosaurs go? Creation or evolution are neither scientifically demonstrable. They are merely biased interpretations of evidence based on strongly held beliefs by each of these worldviews. So be aware of the fact that we're talking about historical evidences here. There are problems then with dinosaur extinction theories, and I'm getting close to the end, about 4 or 5 slides and I'm done. I'm doing okay. Mr. Lambton wrote this book called New Theories on Dinosaurs, 1989. He said, authors of various competence have suggested that dinosaurs disappeared because the climate deteriorated too fast or too slow, too hot or too cold, too wet or too dry, or the diet did too much food or too little food, or that there were poisons in the water or in the plants, or there were harmful minerals, or that the beneficial minerals disappeared. Other writers have put the blame on disease, parasites, wars, anatomical or metabolic disorders, old age, evolutionary drift, changes in atmospheric pressure, poison gases, volcanic dust, excessive oxygen from plants, little egg-eating mammals, raids from little green men, lack of standing room on the ark, and on it went. What does that mean? They don't have the foggiest idea. Dinosaur extinctions in this Bible on dinosaurs called Dinosauria. Thus, their disappearance, whether sudden or gradual, was not predicted on the basis of their previous evolutionary history. It was an enigma. You don't read this unless somebody shows this to you. Way back in 1983, the New Scientist said, why do geologists draw a line across their time charts at 65 million years ago and talk about the boundary between the age of dinosaurs amid more recent rocks? Pressed on this point by the audience at a recent British Association meeting, Professor E.R. Oxburgh, president of the Association's Geological Section, said that all such boundaries are arbitrary and can be drawn anywhere you like. In other words, the boundary on the geologic column between the Cretaceous rocks, age of dinosaurs, and Tertiary rocks, more recent rocks, is purely arbitrary. It exists as a line on paper, not something real you can see in the rocks. I wish somebody had told me that when I was 12 years old. So the most common idea for the extinction of dinosaurs is that an asteroid fell in the ocean down around the Mexican Yucatan and hit, you know, at excess speeds and splashed the water pretty big time and created all this darkness and dust and water and stuff, and the dinosaurs became extinct. What happened to the crocodiles? What happened to the turtles? What happened to the lizards and the snakes? In the geologic column, we see snakes and lizards and crocodiles in the same layers with the dinosaurs. Why didn't they get killed? None of this makes sense to me. It just killed the dinosaurs? Really? An alternate view to extraterrestrial impact, which has gained some support, holds that major terrestrial volcanism. Major terrestrial volcanism tapping deep magma sources could be a source of iridium enrichment. So they've spun this yarn for years that asteroid strikes brings a spatial element down here called iridium, and when they find concentrations of iridium, they identify that possibly there's been a strike of an asteroid close to that source, and so that carried weight for a long time until they realized that iridium enrichment comes up in volcanic magma from deep granitic sources. Now that takes it back in the Bible, because when the breaking up of the great deep took place, the flood would have produced this deep release of volcanic sources that would have flushed this iridium out of the heart of the earth up onto the land. And so to me, this is it just shoves it back to the flood event, just like we would think. Then maybe this could be the solution to their extinction. Oh no, was that the day? So what does all this mean to you? It means that dinosaurs lived. They were created on day 6 with Adam and Eve. That 2 of every air-breathing kind that was created on day 6, 2 of every kind, male and female, was put on the ark. So juvenile dinosaurs were put on the ark. So that's why they didn't go extinct. Okay? So we find all of these evidences, some significant evidences in the Congo around Lake Tele. For years now, the people over there have been seeing strange things. I was in Miami, Florida, doing a presentation about 10, 12 years ago, and a whole group of Moravian brethren came up from southern Miami, and they had migrated from Nicaragua to Miami Beach or Miami. And so this whole gang, pastor and all, about 65 of them, came to the meeting one day. And at the end of the meeting, they all come around me and they say to me, "You do not have to convince us of this." I said, "Okay, what are you talking about?" He said, "When we left our city, at the south of our city, there is a river that runs through the land, comes in from the ocean, runs through the land, and we have to cross that bridge to and fro from our village. One day we were walking across the bridge, and we looked down off to the side of the bridge, and there was a large animal with gray wrinkled skin, a long neck, and flippers. It was a marine animal, but it said it was about 40 feet long, and it was sitting there, and it stayed there 2 days. They all saw it. All 65 of them saw it. So I'm asking you a question. Did they see anything, or are they pulling my leg? They looked honest to me. But you see, our worldview, if you're impacted by secular thinking, you'd say, "Oh, you just saw a bird or something." And they said, "No, we saw a large animal, probably 40 feet long, with flippers, a gray wrinkly skin, a long neck, and a rather long tail, sitting in the water, stayed there 2 days." Reports come from the Congo. Reports come from the interior of Australia. Strange animals. Okay. We have found over 200, and I'm finishing up with this. We've found over 200 living fossils. What's a living fossil? A living fossil is a creature that has heretofore only been known in the fossil record. When I was that boy's age going to elementary school, and that was back right after the Mayflower got here. Okay, you got that, don't you? So I was going to grade school, and my teacher was telling me about the coelacanth latimera, a lobe-finned fish that they'd found off the coast of Madagascar. And they said, heretofore we'd only seen that in Cretaceous rock. So they said it's 66 million years old. And then they find one. And then we come to research it and discover that the people down in Central and Southern Africa and Madagascar have been catching and eat these things for years. There's an abundance of them down there. And they were telling me, and I'll promise you I can show it in your textbook if you've got a bio book, in 2017, a Latimera coelacanth with lobe fins, and they'll say that's a living fossil. No, it's just a joke. It's not a living fossil. The most recent one is the Woolly pine. The Woolly pine is a beautiful long-needled evergreen that we found in the Mesozoic era. And that's the era where dinosaurs are. And so all of a sudden, one of the park rangers in the interior of Australia is going down into a large canyon, and he gets down in the canyon and he finds an enormous stand of Woolly pines growing all over the place. Now you can get on Google or Amazon and order you a Woolly pine and plant it in your yard. We call them dinosaur trees. So if we find 200 creatures that we thought were extinct because the first time we saw them was in the fossil record, and then we find them alive and well, are they really living fossils? Or maybe the time frame is a little bit skewed by evolutionary bias. What do you think? So, I want to tell you all it's been good, but where's Greta go? Thank you. Thank you, Steph. And I know you had something to do with it, Scott. I'm not going to give you much credit. He deserves a lot of credit. Thank you. Thank you for the church. Thank you for all your help. This is my last presentation this trip. And so I pray that you have a great service in the morning. The most of you go here, you go someplace, go wherever you go, go. Worship God, sing songs, read the word of the Lord, be seen walking in the house of the holy. That's important. Let the community see you going in there and mingling with these people. Amen. Be one of them. There they go, down the road through the rain, sleet, and snow. Amen. So out on the table is a book on dinosaurs. If you don't have this, you should buy it. It's a good one.
I just have a question.
Yeah, go ahead. Ask it.
Yeah, we're talking dinosaurs, this, that, and the other. Has anybody ever explained the Loch Ness Monster?
No. We don't know how. We're not quite sure. It's like Bigfoot.
It's like, does it exist? Does it?
We don't know. There's been no justification about it. It's like, what do they call that thing? It's supposed to be running around in the jungles down in Oklahoma and
Bigfoot?
Bigfoot. What else do they call it? Sasquatch? You know what I think they're seeing? I think they're seeing 11 and 12 foot black bears running around on their hind legs. There aren't any Sasquatches. I'm sorry. Father said, you haven't seen one. They really stink. I chased one all over the woods. I said, you don't want to catch it. You're in trouble if you catch it. You better leave him alone. Because what you're going to get a hold of is something bigger than you. And we got a lot of black bears in the southeast of Oklahoma where they think that these things exist. So there's a lot of things out there that people think exist and we've never found them. And I'm telling you right now, if Sasquatch existed, we'd already found him. There's too many people looking for him. Amen.
There's supposed to be more than one because I see him in Washington and in other states.
They're not seeing them. You know,
well,
or the Bible is Goofyville, okay? If they're finding these things that are part monkey and part people, then that's an evolutionary extension.
It's what the people are saying.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I'm telling you they're not seeing that. They're seeing something else, some other kind of animal, or else they would haul one in here. Bring me one. Just bring me his toenail or the hair off of his arm, or bring me something. Don't be telling me how it stinks. I've been around other things that stink. That's not proof of anything except it needs a bath. You got it? Okay, this book is out there. You need this.
A natural
The natural sciences know nothing of evolution. This man passed away in the 90s. He was a brilliant man. He had 3 PhDs in chemistry. He was the greatest defender of the faith that I've ever known about. When he died, I felt alone for a week. This is his greatest book. 3 PhDs in chemistry. He defended the faith. He's an incredible debater. Had a long beard hung down on his stomach. And he would sit down in a chair and just talk to you. And if you listen to him talk, you'd understand he's a different kind of dude. A.E. Wilder Smith spoke 5 languages. He taught a lot in Switzerland, a lot in Germany. And then he came to the United States and taught at the University of Illinois for a while. A brilliant guy. This book, The Natural Sciences Know Nothing of Evolution, was used by a freshman student at San Diego State University to win Dr. Dean Kenyon to the Lord. Kenyon was one of the top 5 evolutionary theorists in the world. He wrote his book called Biological Predestination. And this boy had been praying about taking this class. He said, I'm just going to win Dean Kenyon to the Lord. Amen. So he said, how will I do that? Amen. I'll get one of Dr. Wilder Smith's books. And so when Kenyon comes in, he put on his clean clothes and brushed his teeth and put on deodorant and had his smile. He shook Dr. Kenyon's hand and he said, would you please read this and tell me what you think about it? Kenyon looked at that and he says, you know, he goes in and every class period the boy's standing there. How you doing, Dr. Kenyon? Fine. Have you read the book yet? It's another classic case of the unjust judge and the widow woman. Yeah. Luke 18. After 6 weeks, he's tormenting Dr. Kenyon out of his soul. Dr. Kenyon said, I got to go back to the room and read this book and refute it and be done with it. He read the book but couldn't refute it. And he wound up going to church and getting saved. So this boy handed this book to a leading professor, San Francisco State University, and won him to the Lord with this book. Incredible. Okay, one other thing. The heart of Dr. Henry Morris's life is in this book. It is the annotated copy of his Bible, and they've printed it. If you don't want the Bible, you can just buy his annotated notes in a little paperback. It's out there on the table. But you need to read these notes, okay? This is more expensive than the notes, so you probably just want to get the notes. You got a Bible. Okay, God bless you. Thank you for coming. Matt will be in here in just a second.